What would you do if the person you loved most in the world made the boldest move of their life and didn't tell you? That's not a tabloid headline. That's Prince Harry's reality. And it all started with a whisper behind palace walls that grew into a firestorm no one could contain. Let's rewind. It was supposed to be a quiet week, the calm before the storm of another royal holiday season. After everything, the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir, the Spotify disaster, the security lawsuits, Harry had finally begun to settle into a fragile kind of peace in Montecito. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. He was spending more time at home, staying out of headlines, trying to be a father, not a fighter. But then, something strange happened. A source leaked a cryptic tip to a journalist in London. A tip that didn't make sense. A tip that, at first, no one believed. Because it suggested something impossible. That Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, had been back in England and met privately with King Charles, without Harry ever knowing. Let that sink in. No cameras, no aides, no public acknowledgement, no mention in any press release, not even to her own husband. Just Meghan and Charles, alone, face to face, for nearly 2 hours, weeks ago, and no one said a word, until now. But the question isn't just why this happened. It's what happened behind that closed door, and what Harry did the moment he found out. Because when he did, everything changed. This isn't just another royal drama. This isn't about tabloids or tantrums. This is about power, reputation, legacy, and betrayal. Because if the whispers are true, Meghan wasn't just sipping tea with her father-in-law. She came with a proposal, a return, a rebrand, a bold plan to renegotiate her royal image. Alone. No Harry, no Sussex duo, just Meghan, back, under her own name, on her own terms. You're probably thinking, why would she do that now, after everything? But what if I told you this move wasn't impulsive? What if it had been in the works for months? What if insiders, deep within Clarence House and Buckingham Palace, had known this was coming? What if even Camilla knew and tried to stop it? Because here's what we know. Shortly before the leaks hit the press, an emergency palace meeting was held. Phones were confiscated. Notes were banned. Only senior royals and a select few advisors were allowed inside. They weren't just discussing PR. They were preparing for the fallout. Why? Because Prince Harry was about to learn the truth, and no one knew how he'd react. Let me ask you, can a marriage survive when trust is shattered like this? Can a royal family, already fractured, handle another unexpected twist? And why did Meghan keep this meeting a secret? Let's not forget, it was only a few years ago she sat beside Harry, tears in her eyes, describing how the royal institution didn't protect her. She accused them of neglect, of racism, of driving her to the brink. Now, that same woman allegedly returned, alone, to the man she once implied was part of the problem, and offered to come back, not to apologize, not to seek forgiveness, but to reposition herself, to rebuild, to reclaim something. But reclaim what? Royal favor? Public affection? Global prestige? Some insiders say it was a smart, strategic move. Others are calling it pure betrayal, a quiet coup from within. But whatever side you fall on, one thing's for certain. Harry didn't see it coming. And the timing? Couldn't be worse. Reports suggest the Duke was preparing a low-key holiday season, perhaps even planning to reconnect with some of his old military charities in the UK. He'd hoped to stay out of headlines, to keep things peaceful for the kids. But instead, he walked into a media storm, orchestrated by his own wife. And no, this isn't just speculation. We've got insider accounts, email leaks, flight logs, and a growing list of palace staffers willing to talk, off the record. This is not just another PR stunt. This is real. In the coming chapters, we're going to break down every shocking detail. From the moment Meghan landed in London, to the silent standoff with Camilla, to the emergency phone call Harry received from his brother William. You're going to hear what insiders say was offered during that secret meeting, what Charles's reaction reportedly was, and why this could tear the family apart permanently. Because this isn't just about a secret meeting. It's about a secret agenda, a fracture within a marriage, a battle for the spotlight, and a legacy being rewritten in real time. But before we dive in, ask yourself, why didn't Meghan tell Harry? Was she protecting him? Testing the waters before bringing him in? Or was this the beginning of something far more personal? Something that may not include him at all? And what does King Charles gain by entertaining this? A distraction? A bargaining chip? Or a potential pawn in a much larger power play? We've heard this story before. Princess Diana, Fergie, even Camilla in her early years. Women who tried to navigate the labyrinth of royal protocol and often got burned. But Meghan isn't following their script. She's writing her own. The problem? No one told Harry he was no longer co-author. And when he found out, he made a call. A call that would set the entire royal machine into motion. A call that would pit brother against brother, father against son, wife against husband. Because what happened next was something no one expected. Not William, not Camilla, not even Charles, but certainly not Harry. You ready? Because the leak that started it all was only the beginning. And what Meghan said behind those palace doors, that changes everything. What happens when the one thing meant to stay buried suddenly gets dragged into the light? It wasn't the palace. It wasn't Meghan. It wasn't even Harry. The first public sign that something huge had happened and been carefully kept under wraps didn't come from an official source. It came from an anonymous email. Not to the tabloids, not to the BBC, but to a tiny royal gossip blog that barely gets 300 views a day. And that's exactly why the sender chose it. No one would suspect. No one would trace it. But someone wanted this story out. And they wanted it quietly. The subject line? Clarence House. 1 p.m., 2 weeks ago. No Harry. That's it. Inside the message. She was there. Check the CCTV. No name. No attachments. No demand. Just that. The blog owner, a woman in her late 30s who writes under the pseudonym The Crown Whisperer, almost deleted it. But something about the phrasing stuck with her. She. As if she needed no introduction. As if everyone should know who it was. And in royal circles, there's only one woman they speak of like that. Meghan Markle. The blogger hesitated. She'd written a dozen speculative posts over the years about Meghan's future, about whether she'd ever return to England, about the so-called olive branch Charles supposedly extended after the Queen's funeral. But this felt different. She decided to post a vague teaser. Unconfirmed report of a private, closed-door meeting at Clarence House involving a royal in-law. No public record. No press. Developing. That single post changed everything. Within hours, larger accounts picked it up. Reddit threads exploded. Royal Twitter, or Royal Talk, as some now call it, went into overdrive. And within 48 hours, the quiet whisper had turned into a thunderous roar. Who met with King Charles? Was it Meghan? Why wasn't Harry there? Was this the beginning of a comeback? Now, if this had just been internet noise, Clarence House could have ignored it. Let it fade. Pretend it never happened. But then an image surfaced. Blurry, grainy, zoomed in, but unmistakable. A dark SUV, pulling through the gated side entrance of Clarence House. Two figures in the back seat. One of them, by posture alone, looked exactly like Meghan Markle. And here's where it gets strange. That image wasn't leaked by the press. It wasn't published by paparazzi. It came from a security contractor. Someone who used to work the grounds for special events. Someone who still had access to archive camera logs. And who knew exactly which angle the palace would forget to delete. Why would he risk his clearance to leak that? Because, he told a friend in confidence, the public deserves to know when chess is being played behind their backs. The friend? She went straight to the Daily Express. And within 24 hours, it was front page. Meghan's secret meeting with Charles, and Harry knew nothing. Now picture it. Harry's in California. He's sitting with Archie on his lap, a juice box on the table, cartoons humming in the background. His phone buzzes. He picks it up. And there, staring back at him, is an image of his wife. In London, at Clarence House, with his father. He hadn't been told. Not even a hint. And she was just upstairs getting ready to go for a walk with the kids. Can you imagine that moment? What do you say? Do you storm into the room and demand answers? Do you stay silent, hoping it's all just a misunderstanding? Do you call your security team and demand a flight manifest from Heathrow? Because according to insiders, Harry did all three. He was stunned. Not angry. Not immediately. Just hollow. He reportedly walked into the kitchen, handed his phone to Meghan, and said, "Care to explain?" She looked at the phone, paused, then simply said, "We weren't ready to talk about it yet." We. Not I. Who's we? Her and Charles. Now here's where things start to crack wide open. According to two different sources close to palace staff, this wasn't Meghan's first communication with King Charles in recent months. There had been emails, encrypted messages, even a brief, cryptic call, all routed through third parties. Some say it began after the coronation, when Meghan notably didn't attend. The silence afterward? Too complete. Too perfect. That's when the theory emerged. They've been talking. Quietly. Strategically. But the actual face-to-face meeting? That was new. And Harry? Completely in the dark. Now, why would Meghan go to such lengths? Why not just tell him? According to one insider, a former press liaison who had worked with Meghan during her royal days, it was all about control. She didn't want the noise. She didn't want Harry to freak out and derail it. She believed if she could just get Charles in a room, alone, she could change the narrative. She could show him who she really was. Let that sink in. She didn't trust Harry to let her be heard. And maybe she was right. Because once the leak hit, the palace was thrown into chaos. They didn't deny it. They didn't confirm it. They went silent. Which, in royal terms, is practically a confession. But behind those gates, pressure was boiling. William was furious. Camilla was livid. Aides were scrambling to manage the optics. But the king? He was calm. Some say he even smiled when the photo broke. Why? Because he'd been expecting this moment. He just didn't expect it this way. What happened during that meeting, no one fully knows. Not yet. But we've heard whispers. That Meghan came prepared. That she brought documents. That she had a plan. A re-entry strategy. A proposal to rebrand. To reclaim her title, not legally, but publicly. To be seen as a working royal again. Not through Buckingham, but through her own platform, sanctioned by the crown. A kind of hybrid return. Royal by association, but independent in operation. Charles, according to a source, was intrigued. She was composed. She was persuasive. She didn't apologize. But she didn't accuse, either. She said she wanted to help repair the family's image, starting with herself. Can you believe that? The woman once branded a royal rebel, now offering to be the monarchy's modern ambassador? But where does that leave Harry? Exactly where the leak left him. Confused, betrayed, isolated. Because no matter how you frame it, he wasn't in the room. He wasn't consulted. He wasn't informed. And worst of all, he wasn't part of the plan. And what Meghan said when Charles asked why Harry wasn't with her, that is what triggered the emergency palace meeting. But what exactly did she say? That's where we're headed next. To the moment King Charles heard the most shocking sentence ever spoken in Clarence House, and what he did immediately after. What do you say to the father of the man you married, when he asks, why did you come alone? Not with your husband, not with your children, not with your security detail from Montecito. Just you. One woman. One handbag. One carefully memorized proposal that could rewrite history. And what Meghan reportedly said in response. Because this isn't about Harry. This is about me. That sentence hit Clarence House like a thunderclap. Not shouted. Not whispered. Just delivered. Cool, calm, and unwavering. Let's unpack that. This wasn't Meghan Markle coming as the Duchess of Sussex. This was Meghan, pitching herself as a standalone brand. A brand with royal ties, yes, but not royal dependence. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't seeking reconciliation. She was offering an opportunity. A return, not to the firm, but to the image of royalty. The controlled, filtered, monetized version. But here's the twist. She wasn't just thinking about herself. According to a palace aide who overheard parts of the conversation, Meghan's pitch included proposals for collaborative initiatives, mental health advocacy, children's education campaigns, environmental sustainability, and yes, even Commonwealth tours. Tours. The very thing she swore she'd never do again. The very life she walked away from. So what changed? Simple. The tides. Meghan, once the media darling, had been bruised, badly. The Spotify fallout. The dwindling Archwell buzz. The backlash over the Courage Award she accepted for surviving royal life. And perhaps most damaging of all, Hollywood had moved on. The PR machine she once rode to stardom had gotten tired of the same narrative. No new documentary. No new memoir. No more secrets left to spill, or so they thought. Until now. Because what Meghan offered King Charles wasn't just a deal. It was a comeback strategy. A return not inside the palace, but just close enough to bask in its power. without being weighed down by its rules. Think about that. She wanted to be royal adjacent, to perform high-profile charitable work under the symbolic umbrella of monarchy, while still maintaining her independence. No HRH needed. No tiaras. No balcony waves. Just the prestige. The proximity. Why? Because in branding terms, proximity to royalty is more powerful than inclusion. She wanted the shine, without the suffocation. And here's where things get even more calculated. Meghan didn't just show up with words. She brought data. Reports on audience engagement from her Netflix specials. Audience demographics showing her impact on younger viewers. Even projections of media impressions if she re-entered the public sphere as a modern royal partner. Yes, you heard that right. Modern royal partner. A term her team allegedly coined to describe her proposed hybrid role. Not duchess, not actress, not influencer, but a strategic ally to the crown. Someone who could reach the demographics the Windsors have failed to connect with. Women of color, millennials, Gen Z, Global South. She described herself as the missing bridge. A bridge between tradition and transformation. And King Charles? He listened. He didn't interrupt. Didn't scoff. Didn't object. According to our source, he sat in silence, nodding occasionally. As Meghan laid out her case like a seasoned executive. Now pause here. Put yourself in his shoes. You're the monarch. You've inherited a fractured family, a battered press office, and a shrinking commonwealth. And suddenly, the very woman who caused part of that fracture walks in with a plan to fix it. What do? Politely decline? Or hear her out? Because make no mistake, Charles knows optics. He understands the power of narrative. And he also knows the world is watching his every move post-Queen Elizabeth. So maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to appear open, progressive, forgiving. But don't mistake forgiveness for blindness. Charles wasn't fooled. He knew this meeting had layers. That Meghan's offer came with strings. And he also knew this. Harry had no idea. That alone made the stakes astronomical. Because if Harry discovered Meghan had returned to royal circles, made proposals, made promises, without his knowledge, it could destroy them. But here's the kicker. According to another source, a longtime palace insider with ties to Clarence House, Charles asked her directly, "Do you intend to return as a couple?" And Meghan said, "Not yet. Not yet." 2 words that echoed through the room like a cannon blast. What did she mean? Was it a trial run? Was she considering going solo permanently? Was this a test? Now here's where it gets murkier. A leaked memo. Allegedly from one of... What do you do when the truth leaks before you've decided what it means? That was the question racing through King Charles III's mind as he stood in his study, the windows of Clarence House glowing faintly against a gray London afternoon. The meeting was over. The handshake had been polite. The silence afterward had been intentional. And yet, the silence was already failing. He knew at the instant his private secretary knocked, not once, but twice. The second knock was sharper, urgent. The kind of knock that says the story is moving faster than the crown. Because when a photograph leaks, it isn't just an image. It's a clock. And the clock had started ticking. Charles had lived long enough to understand how these things unfold. A rumor becomes a whisper. A whisper becomes a headline. A headline becomes a narrative. And once the narrative takes shape, it doesn't ask permission from the truth. So he did what monarchs do when the ground begins to shift beneath them. He weighed the consequences. On one side, his son, Prince Harry, already wounded by years of public warfare, memoir confessions, and unresolved grief. A son who believed he had finally stepped away from the shadows of the palace, only to feel them creeping back in. On the other side, his daughter-in-law, Meghan Markle, brilliant, divisive, relentless. A woman who didn't come asking for absolution. A woman who came with a plan. And somewhere between them, the monarchy itself. An institution older than any one person, but suddenly more fragile than it had ever been. Charles sank into the leather chair behind his desk. He closed his eyes for just a second, long enough to hear his mother's voice in his head, long enough to remember what Queen Elizabeth had always said in moments like this. Never be hurried by the noise. But the noise was deafening now. Because the truth was this. Charles hadn't expected to be intrigued. He had expected anger, resentment, even defensiveness. What he hadn't expected was to see competence, strategy, a calm articulation of value. Meghan had spoken not like a wronged in-law, but like a consultant walking into a boardroom. She had framed herself as a solution to a problem the monarchy didn't like to admit it had. Relevance. And Charles understood relevance better than most. He had spent decades waiting to inherit a crown while the world changed around him. He had watched public trust waver. He had watched younger generations drift away from tradition. So when Meghan spoke about reach, optics, and cultural bridges, he didn't dismiss it. That terrified him. Because the moment you start seeing merit in the argument of someone who has already fractured your family, you are no longer neutral. And neutrality is the last refuge of a king trying not to choose sides. Charles reached for the phone, then stopped. He considered calling Harry. He even dialed half the number before setting it back down. What would he say? Your wife came to see me. You weren't invited? She thinks she can help us? Any one of those sentences could detonate what remained of his relationship with his son. And yet, if Harry found out from the press, the damage would be irreparable. This was the dilemma. Tell Harry now and risk fury. Say nothing and guarantee betrayal. There was no third option. Charles stood and walked to the window. Outside, the guards remained still, trained, unflinching. He envied them. Their duty was clear. His was not. Because this wasn't just about Meghan or Harry. It was about William. It was about Camilla. It was about a monarchy already reeling from years of scandal and scrutiny. If this became public without a plan, it would look like weakness, like chaos, like a king being maneuvered by forces he no longer controlled. And Charles had spent his entire life waiting for control. He turned back to his desk and finally made the call, not to Harry, not to Meghan, but to his communications secretary. Clear my afternoon, he said, and summoned the principals. The principals. That phrase alone tells you everything. Within hours, a quiet but unmistakable message moved through palace corridors. Meetings were canceled. Calendars were wiped. Senior aides were told to remain available. By early evening, the core power structure of the modern monarchy was preparing to gather. An emergency palace meeting. But before we get there, we need to understand something crucial. Charles wasn't just afraid of the leak. He was afraid of the precedent. Because if Meghan could walk into Clarence House alone, negotiate terms, and leave without consequence, what did that say about the authority of the crown? And if Harry discovered his wife was positioning herself independently, not as a couple, not as a united front, what would that do to him? Charles remembered the look on Harry's face as a boy, the grief, the defiance, the sense of being overlooked. He had failed him once before. Could he afford to fail him again? Now here's where the contradiction sharpens. Because while Charles was wrestling with guilt and responsibility, another voice was already preparing to intervene. Camilla. She had known something was coming. She always did. Years of navigating palace politics had sharpened her instincts. She noticed the canceled appointments, the hushed conversations, the guarded expressions. When Charles finally told her, carefully, selectively, her reaction was immediate. This cannot happen again, she said flatly. Not, this is unfortunate. Not, this is delicate. This cannot happen again. Camilla didn't see opportunity. She saw threat. She saw a woman who understood optics better than most of the palace staff. A woman who had already demonstrated how damaging a narrative could be when it spiraled out of control. And she saw something else too, something Charles didn't want to admit. Meghan had leverage, public sympathy, global recognition, and the ability to command attention in ways the crown no longer could on its own. That made her dangerous. Camilla warned him plainly. If you entertain this, she said, you will lose William. And you may lose Harry entirely. Charles said nothing. Because he knew she might be right. And then there was William. When William was informed, not of the meeting itself, but of the leak, his response was colder than Charles expected. So she's back, he said. And we're finding out from the internet. There was no rage in his voice, just disappointment. The kind that signals distance, not drama. William didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply withdrew. And in the monarchy, withdrawal is far more dangerous than confrontation. Because it means trust is being recalculated. By nightfall, Charles had heard from all sides. Advisors urging caution. Courtiers urging silence. Family members urging firmness. And still, the one person he hadn't spoken to was the one who mattered most. Harry. Why? Because Charles was afraid of the answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. What if Harry didn't just feel betrayed? What if Harry felt replaced? Because if Meghan's proposal moved forward, even in theory, it would mean she was re-entering royal life in some form, without him, and that would force Harry to confront something he had avoided for years, that he might not be essential to the story anymore. Charles picked up the phone again. This time, he didn't dial Harry. He dialed a different number, a number reserved for moments of institutional crisis. Within minutes, confirmation arrived. The emergency palace meeting would take place the next morning. No press, no records, no allowances for emotion, just strategy. Because whatever Meghan had said in that room, it had already set forces in motion that could not be undone. And the monarchy was about to make a decision that would echo for decades. But before that meeting could begin, one final piece of information surfaced. A message from a source inside the palace, addressed to someone who was never meant to see it. And once Charles read it, his hesitation vanished. Because it revealed something Meghan had not said in the room, but had made clear elsewhere. Something about Harry, something about the future. And it left Charles with only one conclusion. This was no longer a family matter. This was war room territory. And what was revealed in that message? That's where we're going next. Because the moment Charles realized who else knew about the meeting, everything escalated. What happens when the last person to know the truth is the one most affected by it? It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a conversation. It was a headline. A digital headline, pushed to Prince Harry's phone by a news app he had forgotten he even had. Meghan's secret meeting with King Charles. Shocking private proposal leaked. At first, he thought it was clickbait. One of the usual tabloid traps. Sensational. Wild. Unfounded. But then he saw the photo. It was unmistakable. The side angle. The dark coat. The purposeful walk through the side entrance of Clarence's house. Even grainy, even cropped, he knew that posture. It was her. His wife. In London. At Clarence's house. Alone. And the timestamp? Nearly 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. Harry froze. His hands didn't shake. His breathing didn't change. What changed was the temperature in the room. It dropped, like ice running through his veins. He stared at the image again, hoping it would blink away, hoping it was AI, a manipulated composite, a hoax. But he knew better. And so he did what any betrayed husband might do in that moment. He walked straight to Meghan. She was in the kitchen, Lilibet on her hip. She was humming. That hurt the most. The normalcy, the warmth, the lie by omission. He didn't yell, didn't throw the phone, didn't accuse. He just held it up and said, "Tell me that's not what it looks like." Meghan paused, looked, said nothing. That silence, longer than a breath, shorter than a scream, told him everything. She hadn't told him. And worse, she hadn't planned to. Why, he asked. And that's when it hit. Meghan wasn't sorry. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't scrambling to explain. She was prepared. That shook him more than the image. Because this wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Her answer? It was a conversation that needed to happen. And I needed it to happen without noise. Without noise. As if he was the noise. Harry sat down. He didn't trust his legs to keep holding him. So you flew to London. Met with my father. Alone. Behind closed doors. And didn't think to mention it. It wasn't the right time. He stared at her. The right time to tell your husband you're making deals with the monarchy? She sighed. Not guiltily, but like someone exhausted by someone else's failure to understand. I wasn't making deals. I was exploring options. For both of us. That word again. Options. To Harry, it felt like plans. Plans made without him. Plans that involved a future he hadn't agreed to. That's when the anger finally rose. He stood, pacing. Do you even hear yourself? You went back into the institution that you said almost destroyed you. That we left together. And you pitched them what? A new version of you? Without me in the room? Meghan's response. Because with you in the room, they wouldn't have listened. It was honest. Brutally so. And it shattered something inside him. Harry walked to the window. The same move Charles had done hours earlier. Outside, California skies. Palm trees. Safe, warm distance. Inside, everything was unraveling. Because Harry wasn't just feeling betrayed. He was feeling irrelevant. For years, he had believed that leaving the firm meant choosing love over legacy. That he and Meghan were a team. That every headline, every hit piece, every struggle, they faced together. But this wasn't together. This was strategy. Solo. A palisade, speaking off the record, later said. Harry wasn't angry at the meeting. He was angry at being edited out. That night, Harry didn't sleep. He stayed up, scrolling through the coverage. Some outlets framed it as reconciliation. Others painted Meghan as an opportunist. One particularly savage piece called her the Duchess of Spin. But Harry didn't care about the press. He cared about the fact that she had gone alone. What did that say about where they stood? What did that say about what she saw as their future? By morning, he had made a decision. He called his team, not his Hollywood reps, not the Archwell staff, his UK legal team, the same one who had handled his security battles, the one who had managed the memoir negotiations, the one he hadn't spoken to in months. He asked one question: did the palace register any new initiatives involving my name or Meghan's? The pause on the other end told him everything. Yes, they finally said. Last week, something about a proposal, drafted internally, not confirmed, but your name wasn't on it. Not on it. That's when the cold rage set in. He wasn't just left out. He was excluded. And the wording of that file? Independent royal representation, preliminary discussion. Only. Meghan Markle. Not H&M. Not Duke and Duchess. Just her. The power couple narrative shattered. This wasn't just a solo move. It was a rebranding. And Harry? He wasn't the co-star anymore. Now here's where things take an even more complicated turn. Because at that very moment, back in London, palace aides were scrambling. The leak had triggered a wave of inquiries. CNN, Sky News, The Guardian, even international outlets from Canada, Australia, and South Africa. Everyone wanted a quote. But the palace had none. Because Charles had ordered a blackout. No confirmations. No denials. No briefings. But behind closed doors, he was panicking. Because the message he'd read, the one we teased last chapter, it was an internal email, sent by an aide, addressed to a communications officer, CC'd to someone who should never have seen it. The subject line? Strategic benefit of solo Markle engagement, discussed with external PR counsel. That was the bombshell. Charles realized it meant people outside the palace had already been involved. Meghan's team, consultants, lawyers, people who had been part of the strategy long before she sat down with him. She hadn't just proposed a comeback. She had built one. And the monarchy? They were already in it, whether they liked it or not. Now Charles faced a terrible truth. He had entertained a conversation that could permanently divide his sons. And he had done it without setting boundaries. He had let her in, let her speak, let her frame the terms. And now the entire structure was cracking under the weight of a single secret. But the worst part? Harry was no longer just reacting. He was planning. Because the next morning, he made his own phone call. Not to Meghan, not to Charles, but to Prince William. And what he said in that call would send shockwaves through the entire family. Because for the first time in a long time, Harry didn't call to apologize. He called to warn him. What kind of pitch starts with betrayal and ends with a kingdom in crisis? Because make no mistake, Meghan Markle's return proposal wasn't a plea. It wasn't framed as reconciliation. It was framed as strategy, a chess move, calculated, timed, disruptive. And it didn't involve Harry, not directly. This was Meghan, solo, laying out a blueprint for comeback in the most controversial, unexpected way possible, with royal approval, but not royal oversight. Let's rewind to that fateful meeting inside Clarence House, the one now etched into royal history, though no official record exists. As Meghan stepped into the king's private drawing room, she wasn't just a duchess re-entering hostile territory. She was a woman on a mission, and she came prepared. Behind the scenes, her team had already sketched out a detailed proposal. It wasn't scribbled on a napkin. It was formatted, branded, numbered. This wasn't casual. It was a campaign. And she titled it, according to a leaked draft shown to a senior aide, the Sussex Transition Framework, Public Service Without Borders. That phrase, loaded. Transition implies forward movement. Framework gives it authority. And public service without borders. It implies global reach, international clout, something bigger than Windsor Castle or Balmoral. So what was she pitching exactly? A role, a space, a position that had never existed in the monarchy before. Let's break it down. 1. Independent royal representation. This was the cornerstone. She proposed to serve as a non-working, non-salaried ambassador, funded by her own platforms, to support select causes aligned with the Royal Foundation's broader values. But she wouldn't answer to the palace. She wouldn't appear on the court circular. She wouldn't wear the royal family's uniform. She would operate as herself. With one exception, she'd carry the symbolic blessing of the crown. No titles, no paycheck, just access, influence, legitimacy. Her phrase? I'm not asking to be inside the castle. I'm asking to stand on the drawbridge and wave the flag. Charles reportedly blinked hard at that. Because what does that even mean? Symbolism without structure. Authority without obligation. 2. Selective appearances under the crown umbrella. Meghan's second proposal involved a series of strategic, high-visibility appearances, not as a royal, but as a royal ally. She'd attend major charitable summits, partner with Commonwealth initiatives, speak at forums where monarchy and modernity intersect. But, and here's the catch, she'd control the narrative. All press vetted by her team. All filming handled her way. All speeches written by her, not the palace ghostwriters. A key clause in her proposal draft read, all appearances must protect the integrity of the crown and the autonomy of the individual. That sentence made at least 2 aides nearly choke. Because it's unprecedented. No one in royal history had ever requested autonomy and affiliation in the same breath. And Meghan? She was requesting it formally. 3. Brand reclamation clause. This was perhaps the boldest section. In her pitch, Meghan laid out her intent to reclaim the image of the Duchess of Sussex, not as a royal title, but as a global identity marker. She emphasized her commitment to reframing that image. From victim of the institution, to survivor of the spotlight, to architect of service. It wasn't just a return. It was a rebrand, complete with messaging guidance and a digital transition plan. Her statement to Charles on this point? The name Meghan Markle was weaponized. But the Duchess of Sussex? That can be wielded for good. You have to give her this. The woman knows her messaging. And Charles, who had seen many proposals in his time, had never seen one quite like this. But here's where it gets icy. Because Harry was never mentioned in any of the documents. Not once. Not as a co-participant. Not as a silent partner. Not even as a legacy figure. When asked, gently, by Charles why Harry wasn't listed in the plan, Meghan answered carefully. He's still processing. He's not ready for this. But I am. And then came the bombshell. I believe I can do more good for the monarchy and the public by showing what royal values look like when applied outside palace walls. Outside, she wasn't just pitching a royal return. She was pitching the monarchy's export model. A freelance duchess. Now let's pause. Imagine being Charles. You're sitting across from a woman who once implied that your institution contributed to her suicidal ideation. A woman who accused unnamed royals of racial insensitivity. A woman who walked away from the crown and lit it on fire with Oprah. And now, she's come back. Not crawling, not begging, not apologizing, but offering you a deal. A platform swap, PR reform, a shot at redemption. With her at the helm. And to make matters worse, Meghan made it clear she was already in talks with global partners. A royal-adjacent campaign with corporate sponsors. Influencer partnerships to spotlight UK-based charities. A planned Netflix segment called Redefining Royal. That's when Charles realized the truth. Meghan didn't need approval. She needed permission to call it royal. Without that word, without the implicit crown endorsement, it was just another celebrity charity tour. But with it, it became something far more dangerous. A parallel monarchy, one built not on tradition, but on narrative. And Charles? He didn't say yes. But crucially, he didn't say no. He said, we'll need to think about implications. For William. For Camilla. For everything. Meghan nodded. Not smugly. Not triumphantly. But like someone who already anticipated that exact response. Because this wasn't about permission. It was about momentum. She had planted the seed. And she knew it was growing, whether Charles wanted it to or not. Because outside that room, the public was already reacting. The leaked image. The headlines. The speculation. Meghan had done something the royals fear most. She had hijacked the narrative. And that's what made William furious. Because while Charles was entertaining a return, William saw a trap. He saw a media comeback wrapped in royal gold. He saw Meghan, not as a problem, but as a brand merger waiting to happen. One that could leave the monarchy looking foolish, fractured, and irrelevant. And when Harry called him, his words were simple. She didn't ask me. She asked him, and he listened. That's when William decided. If Charles wouldn't shut this down, he would. Because William wasn't just angry at Meghan. He was angry at his father. And what William did next would split the palace right down the center. What happens when a royal heir goes to war? Not against the press, not against the public, but against his own blood? Prince William had been silent long enough. But silence, in the royal family, doesn't mean peace. It means pressure. Pressure building, boiling, waiting, until one wrong move, forces detonation. And Meghan's secret meeting with King Charles? That was the trigger. Not just because she came back. Not just because she pitched a role without Harry. But because Charles entertained it. To William, that wasn't strategy. It was capitulation. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Because the monarchy was already teetering, struggling to remain relevant in a world that had moved on from crowns and carriages. And now, the woman who had nearly broken them in 2020 was being quietly welcomed back into the conversation. To William, it wasn't just dangerous. It was insulting, especially to Catherine. Because while Meghan was allegedly plotting a return to the royal stage, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had vanished from it. Health concerns, private retreats, no official appearances. She had faded into silence, while Meghan prepared to re-emerge. And to William, that contrast wasn't coincidence. It was betrayal. So what's really at stake here? Let's break it down. Because this chapter isn't just about family drama. It's about the monarchy's survival. And make no mistake, the monarchy is in crisis. Not the kind of crisis that makes headlines every day, but the kind that corrodes from the inside. And if you follow the signs closely, you'll see. 1. Declining public trust. Over the past 5 years, public support for the royal family has eroded, especially among younger generations. Polls show Gen Z and millennials are less interested in the crown than any generation before them. Terms like colonial, outdated, and privileged appear frequently in sentiment analysis. And Meghan's departure and her accusations only accelerated that drift. Now, Charles thought bringing her back, in a limited, symbolic way, could rebuild some of that trust. But William? He saw it as throwing gasoline on a dying fire. Because if the monarchy needs Meghan to stay relevant, what does that say about the monarchy? 2. Camilla's credibility. Let's not forget Queen Camilla. She fought for her place, endured decades of criticism, survived public hatred in the aftermath of Diana's death. And just as she had finally stabilized her image, here comes Meghan, back into the fold, commanding headlines, reshaping narratives. Camilla reportedly told aides, "I won't be turned into the villain again." Because that's how she sees this. She fears a repeat of the Diana effect, only this time with Meghan in the starring role. A charismatic outsider, an underdog figure, a woman who can command global attention, even without the crown. And Camilla knows. If Meghan becomes the public's preferred face of the monarchy, she becomes invisible again. And invisibility, for a queen, is political death. 3. The William factor. William is more than the heir. He's the stabilizer, the reliable one, the royal who doesn't make headlines until he does. And when he does, you know something's wrong. Because William isn't loud. He's strategic, measured. But this tested him. When he found out about Meghan's proposal, he didn't yell. He called a meeting. His own, privately, at Kensington Palace, with his closest advisors. The agenda? Preserving the integrity of the future monarchy. Translation? Stop Meghan's comeback at any cost. He reportedly told his team, "We can't let the institution become a PR platform for a brand." Because to William, that's what was happening. Meghan wasn't coming back to serve. She was coming back to shine. And the monarchy isn't meant to shine. It's meant to endure. Now, let's talk about public image. Because while the palace remained tight-lipped, the media did not. Opinion pieces were erupting across every major outlet. Some said Meghan's return was a smart move, a way to modernize the monarchy, open the door for diversity and international relevance. Others called it a humiliation, a sign that the firm was crawling back to the very woman who torched its reputation. But the most dangerous narrative? That Meghan had outmaneuvered the monarchy again. That was William's nightmare. Because if the public started seeing Meghan as the more dynamic, compassionate, global-facing royal, William's future reign would be seen as redundant. No amount of duty, No number of tree plantings or ribbon cuttings could compete with Meghan's brand engine. And so, he moved to block it. How? Not with an official statement, but with a calculated leak. Yes, the same weapon Meghan had used to expose her secret meeting with Charles, now wielded by William himself. Within 72 hours of Harry's warning phone call, new headlines appeared. Prince William opposed to Meghan's royal reentry plan. Insider claims meeting was unauthorized. It was sharp, deliberate, and filled with palace language. Unauthorized, disruptive, counterproductive to long-term strategy. It was a message, not just to Meghan, but to Charles. If you side with her, you lose me. And for Charles, that was the real crisis. Because the monarchy doesn't survive on charm. It survives on succession. And if the heir to the throne publicly opposes the current monarch's decisions, that's not a family squabble. That's an existential threat. Because once that unity cracks, the institution begins to collapse. But Meghan? She didn't respond to the leaks. She didn't issue a rebuttal. She didn't go on TV. She went quiet, which was even more powerful. Because silence, in her case, created mystery. Mystery created speculation. Speculation created attention. And attention is everything. So where does that leave us? A monarchy at war with its image. A king torn between diplomacy and family. A future king determined to protect his reign. And a duchess, or former duchess, who just won't disappear. But the worst was yet to come. Because while the royals tried to contain the narrative, someone else was about to blow it open. Someone who hadn't spoken until now. Catherine. And her response would stun the monarchy to its core. How do you protect a kingdom when the walls are crumbling from within? That's the question Prince William was asking himself on a loop. Because to him, this wasn't just about Meghan. It wasn't even about Harry anymore. It was about the future. And more importantly, the trap. From the moment he saw the leaked proposal, William knew something felt off. Too polished. Too rehearsed. Too timed. This wasn't a reconciliation attempt. It was a rollout. And someone, perhaps even multiple people, inside the palace had helped her prepare it. That's what truly enraged him. Not just Meghan's return, but the invisible hands that were helping it happen. The same establishment aides who were supposed to protect the monarchy were now being used to reinvent one of its most divisive figures. And what scared him most? They didn't even realize they were in a trap. Because in William's mind, that's exactly what this was. This is a trap, he reportedly said in a closed-door meeting. A staged comeback designed to make us look like the problem all over again. He wasn't wrong. Meghan's image was shifting quickly. Online sentiment was warming. Celebrities were tweeting cryptic support. Influencers were posting, "What if Meghan returned?" videos that racked up millions of views. Even overseas news outlets were calling her the People's Duchess. Sound familiar? That title once belonged to Diana. And William knew the public was hungry for a modern icon again. But if they chose Meghan, they'd lose the monarchy's foundation in the process. He couldn't let that happen. So what did he do? He moved to expose the trap before it closed on them all. Here's how. Step 1. He went public. Quietly. William doesn't blast press releases. He doesn't issue quotes. He lets sources speak. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly, articles started surfacing. William felt blindsided by Meghan's return. Sources say the Prince of Wales believes Meghan's actions undermine unity. Future of the monarchy must remain in trusted hands. William grows concerned. Every word was deliberate. Unity. Trusted. Concerned. They weren't attacks. They were warnings. Soft at first, then sharper. And all the while, silence from Meghan's camp. No denials. No counters. Which only made William's warnings seem more credible. Because the best traps are the ones where the prey doesn't thrash. They just wait. Step 2. He confronted Charles, privately. According to 2 insider sources, William requested a direct meeting with his father. Not a scheduled walk. Not a formal lunch. A confrontation. Inside that meeting, William reportedly told Charles 3 things. You're legitimizing someone who undermined this family. You're gambling with your legacy. If you move forward with this, I will step back. That last line, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Because William knew something Charles had forgotten. The monarchy can't function with divided heirs. If William publicly disavowed the king's decision, it would look like a crisis of succession. And no monarchy survives that. Charles didn't answer immediately. But his face, according to one aide, went pale. Because he realized, if he lost William's cooperation, he didn't just lose a son. He lost the future. Step 3. William called Catherine. She had been silent. Weeks of rest. Medical absence. No press events. No photos. But William knew this couldn't stay just between men anymore. Because the truth was this. Catherine had been hurt most of all. She had stood by William for decades, carried the weight of duty, endured the press, smiled when others would have screamed. And now, Meghan, the same woman who accused her of making her cry, was potentially re-entering the royal fold. Without consequences, without accountability, without Harry. It was absurd. But Catherine? She wasn't going to rant. She wasn't going to tweet. She wasn't even going to write a letter. She had something else in mind. And she told William one sentence that froze him. Let her have the spotlight. But the truth always finds its way to the light. He asked what she meant. She said, simply, they'll know when I speak. That was all. And she meant it. Because Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been documenting everything. Every interaction. Every conversation. Every off-the-record moment from 2018 to now. And while she never intended to go public, she kept it just in case. And now, she was ready. But William didn't want war. Not yet. He wanted containment. He knew that if Catherine stepped into the narrative now, it would go nuclear. So he made a decision. He would give Charles one final chance to walk it back, to shut down Meghan's pitch, to end the speculation, to choose the future over fantasy. But while he was trying to control the fire, another flame had already ignited, because someone else had gotten access to Meghan's pitch deck. Not just the summary, the entire presentation. And they weren't loyal to the crown. They were loyal to money. And they sold it to a media outlet, a powerful one. And what that outlet planned to do with it would not only confirm Meghan's entire plan, but expose the one detail that had been left out of every conversation, her true endgame. And once the public saw that, even Charles might not be able to protect her. What happens when silence becomes the loudest voice in the room? That's the question hanging in the air around Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who, for months, has been absent from the public eye. No appearances, no statements, no soft photo ops in tailored dresses, no elegant hand waves from palace gates, just silence. But that silence isn't emptiness. It's strategy, it's protection, it's pain. And for those paying close attention, it's power. Because while Meghan's return dominated headlines, and while the palace scrambled to craft a response, one person remained off the grid. And that person just happens to be the most beloved royal since Diana. Kate's absence wasn't accidental. It was intentional. And now, the cost of that silence is coming due. Because with Meghan's media strategy re-emerging, and with a global outlet now preparing to publish her full comeback proposal, the contrast between the two women is about to reach critical mass. And the palace knows it. Let's unpack what's really at stake here. Because Kate isn't just the future queen. She's the firm's emotional anchor. And without her visible presence, the monarchy feels hollow, especially to the public. But more dangerously, her absence gives Meghan room to reposition herself as the monarchy's modern female face. That's not speculation. That's branding. And the press? They've noticed. Headlines have quietly started shifting. Whereas Catherine, as Meghan returns, Kate remains silent, and people are asking why. A tale of two duchesses. One rises, one vanishes. This isn't coincidence. It's the start of a narrative war, and Kate is right in the center. Let's go deeper. 1. The power of absence. Catherine's silence has always worked in her favor. It's part of her mystique. The polished smile. The grace under pressure. The restraint. But now, that same silence is being twisted. By whom? Insiders point to Meghan's team, subtly feeding the idea that Kate's silence equals avoidance. That she's retreating because she can't compete. That her role is now obsolete in the era of Meghan's modern royal feminism. But here's what they don't realize. Kate hasn't disappeared. She's been watching, recording, cataloging, building a case. According to one trusted aide, the same one who helped coordinate Kate's Hold Still project, the princess kept a meticulous private journal during the most turbulent royal years. The Oprah fallout, the text message scandals, the infamous "Kate made me cry" controversy. She didn't write to vent. She wrote to preserve the truth. And now that Meghan's re-entry is underway, Kate is considering sharing that journal, not as a memoir, but as a corrective history. Imagine that. The quiet princess, the royal who never speaks out, releasing her version of the story, not through scandal, not through Oprah, but through dignified disclosure. The palace hasn't greenlit it yet, but whispers say she's already spoken with publishers, anonymously, and they're salivating at the prospect. Because for the first time, it would give the public a direct line into Kate's truth. And if that happens, it could shatter the very foundation of Meghan's comeback narrative. 2. The hidden cost of loyalty. Now let's talk about the emotional toll. Because Kate's silence hasn't been easy. According to palace insiders, her retreat from the public wasn't just medical. It was emotional, strategic, and forced. After Meghan's secret meeting with Charles was leaked, and the press began reframing the Duchess of Sussex as a woman of vision, Kate became a living contradiction. She had sacrificed everything for duty. Her privacy, her youth, her independence. And now? The woman who accused her of being cold, of making her cry, of not supporting women, was being welcomed back and rewarded. Behind closed doors, Kate reportedly asked William one haunting question. Did I do it all for nothing? Because she had played by the rules, endured in silence, avoided scandal. And yet, it was Meghan, not her, getting the redemption arc. William, ever the loyal husband, told her, no one forgets dignity, especially not in the long run. But even he knew that wasn't enough. Not when the headlines were turning. Not when the public was hungry for drama. Not when Meghan's brand was back in play. So what does Kate do? What can she do? She won't go on television. She won't do a podcast. But she might do something far more devastating. She might let someone else speak for her. Because here's the twist. A respected journalist, one who had been close to Diana in the 90s, has been quietly compiling a biography, not a tabloid expose. A serious, researched account of Catherine's rise, and included in that manuscript, portions of Kate's private writings, shared with permission, not the whole journal, but pieces, excerpts, moments that contradict the Oprah narrative. And now, that journalist is about to publish. Why now? Because the timing isn't a coincidence. It's retaliation, but not ugly, not loud, just timed. Time to drop right after the outlet publishes Meghan's full comeback proposal. And inside that leaked deck, a line that, once public, will trigger a media firestorm. One that directly involves Kate. Because Meghan didn't just propose a new role. She reframed her past conflicts, including with Catherine. And in one section of her pitch, reportedly titled Rewriting the Public Rift, she includes a line that reads, the tension between MM and the Princess of Wales was a misunderstanding born of cultural difference and emotional inaccessibility. Emotional inaccessibility. That phrase. A knife wrapped in politeness. It paints Kate as cold, as closed off, as part of the problem. And once that leaks, the gloves may come off. Because Kate has held her tongue for years. But this is character assassination in slow motion. And if she speaks, even subtly, the sympathy may shift. Back to her. Back to dignity. Back to the woman who bore the brunt in silence. But the palace must act quickly. Because the Meghan pitch leak is imminent. And once the public sees the full picture, they'll demand to know where Kate stands. And if she speaks, she won't just defend herself. She'll defend the monarchy's moral center. Because Catherine isn't just the future queen. She's the proof that loyalty still matters. But what no one knows yet is what else is in that pitch. Because buried in the final pages of Meghan's comeback plan is a clause, one no one expected. One that mentions Archie and Lilibet. And once the press reads that, Harry's world will collapse. What do you do when the truth leaks before you've decided what it means? That was the question racing through King Charles III's mind as he stood in his study, the windows of Clarence House glowing faintly against a gray London afternoon. The meeting was over. The handshake had been polite. The silence afterward had been intentional. And yet, the silence was already failing. He knew at the instant his private secretary knocked, not once, but twice. The second knock was sharper, urgent. The kind of knock that says the story is moving faster than the crown. Because when a photograph leaks, it isn't just an image. It's a clock. And the clock had started ticking. Charles had lived long enough to understand how these things unfold. A rumor becomes a whisper. A whisper becomes a headline. A headline becomes a narrative, and once the narrative takes shape, it doesn't ask permission from the truth. So he did what monarchs do when the ground begins to shift beneath them. He weighed the consequences. On one side, his son, Prince Harry, already wounded by years of public warfare, memoir confessions, and unresolved grief. A son who believed he had finally stepped away from the shadows of the palace, only to feel them creeping back in. On the other side, his daughter-in-law, Meghan Markle, brilliant, divisive, relentless. A woman who didn't come asking for absolution. A woman who came with a plan. And somewhere between them, the monarchy itself. An institution older than any one person, but suddenly more fragile than it had ever been. Charles sank into the leather chair behind his desk. He closed his eyes for just a second, long enough to hear his mother's voice in his head, long enough to remember what Queen Elizabeth had always said in moments like this. Never be hurried by the noise. But the noise was deafening now. Because the truth was this: Charles hadn't expected to be intrigued. He had expected anger, resentment, even defensiveness. What he hadn't expected was to see competence, strategy, a calm articulation of value. Meghan had spoken not like a wronged in-law, but like a consultant walking into a boardroom. She had framed herself as a solution to a problem the monarchy didn't like to admit it had: relevance. And Charles understood relevance better than most. He had spent decades waiting to inherit a crown while the world changed around him. He had watched public trust waver. He had watched younger generations drift away from tradition. So when Meghan spoke about reach, optics, and cultural bridges, he didn't dismiss it. That terrified him. Because the moment you start seeing merit in the argument of someone who has already fractured your family, you are no longer neutral. And neutrality is the last refuge of a king trying not to choose sides. Charles reached for the phone, then stopped. He considered calling Harry. He even dialed half the number before